This is the biggest controversy facing the Trudeau government. It's called the SNC-Lavalin scandal, and what started off as merely a cabinet shuffle busting down the Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould to Veterans Affairs. No disrespect to veterans, but it is seen as a lower portfolio. This is now metastasized. The Globe and Mail reported the Prime Minister's office attempted to pressure Jody Wilson-Raybould into abandoning charges of fraud and corruption against the Quebec construction giant SNC-Lavalin. The Prime Minister called that false, saying Wilson-Raybould never spoke up about this before her resignation, that her presence in cabinet spoke for itself. Well, then she promptly resigned. What does that tell you? Wilson-Raybould has not spoken about the allegations publicly yet. She clearly wants to. She's just hired a former Supreme Court justice as her legal counsel. And there are also now two investigations underway, one by the Ethics Commissioner and another by the Parliamentary Justice Committee. But what will they uncover? And why did the former minister, Jody Wilson-Raybould, resign from cabinet? Let's find out. Joining me now is the Conservative leader, Andrew Scheer. Mr. Scheer, great to have you on the program. I've got to start with this Justice Committee controlled by the Liberals. It's called for an investigation, but they won't call Jody Wilson-Raybould to appear. What do you make of that investigation?
Well, there's only one conclusion. They're trying to hide something. If Justin Trudeau were truly innocent, he would welcome the light of day being shone on this whole affair. We put forward a list of witnesses that included people who interacted with SNC-Lavalin, his principal secretary, Gerald Butts, Katie Telford. We also wanted to hear from Jody Wilson-Raybould herself. I think Canadians are sick and tired of hearing what Justin Trudeau is willing to tell us about what his conversations were with the former Attorney General. It's time that we hear from her directly. So to have Liberal members on the committee vote down the ability to talk to the people that were actually involved, and to summon instead people who have already said that they weren't there for those conversations. The new Attorney General in the House of Commons said he couldn't answer questions because he wasn't there. He wasn't privy to those conversations. Why would we want to hear from people who weren't involved with the actual actions that are being alleged?
Yeah, well, David Lametti, the new Attorney General, was on this program last week, and he said, I don't believe an investigation is even needed. Now, the Prime Minister's argument, Andrew Scheer, and I want your his argument lately has been Jody Wilson-Raybould never spoke up about any pressure before. In fact, she stayed in the cabinet. She took another job. And then he said it was her responsibility to say something if something wrong was happening. What do you make of that? Is that a fair assessment?
Well, again, it's his words. He's the one that is speaking for Jody Wilson-Raybould. He's the one that refuses to waive any kind of privilege that he may have. I'd rather hear what her interpretations of the issue are. And again, you know, to have people like the new Attorney General say, we don't need an investigation because Justin Trudeau told us we don't need one. I've never heard of a judge throwing out a court case because the defendant said he wasn't guilty. I mean, if that was the standard that we have in our legal system, we wouldn't ever have trials in this country. This is ridiculous.
But if the Justice Committee does not call Jody Wilson-Raybould, if they don't call key members of the Prime Minister's office like Gerald Butts, as you are asking for, what can you do? For example, will you ask Conservative senators to start a Senate investigation?
Well, that is certainly another option. You know, the Prime Minister likes to pretend that the people that he's appointed to the Senate are independent, even though they often, most of the time, vote with the government. So this will be an opportunity to put that to the test. The House of Commons Justice Committee will meet again this Tuesday. We will again reintroduce our list of witnesses, the people that were actually involved, the people in the Prime Minister's office who were lobbied 50 times by SNC-Lavalin. You know, at least 14 of those meetings touched on the subjects of justice and law enforcement. This is a construction company, an engineering company. What went on in those meetings?
Okay,
what commitments were made?
I think those are fair questions. Those are fair questions for sure. But Mr. Scheer, they lobbied everybody. They lobbied key members of the Prime Minister's office, key members of the government. But in May of 2018, they also lobbied you. So when you were lobbied by SNC-Lavalin, by the way, I know that's perfectly legal to get lobbied, did they ask you, do you support a deferred prosecution agreement? And if they did, what did you say? What's your answer on that?
It was simply a briefing about what was contained in the Liberal government's own legislation. So it was an opportunity for me just to receive that information. This provision was included in an omnibus budget bill. When it was at the Finance Committee, Conservative members of Parliament raised the objection as to why this was being put forward in that way. It very much should have been a justice measure to allow that kind of scrutiny. But regardless of that,
well, hold on, just to be clear, I just want to just press back.
What we're talking about here is the interference. The Director of Public Prosecutions was given the tool by Parliament to make the determination as to whether or not SNC-Lavalin qualified for this new arrangement. She determined that they didn't, and that's when the political interference is alleged to have happened. So whatever tool Parliament gives to judges, to prosecutors to execute justice, we have to leave the ultimate decisions up to those independent agents of our justice system. The allegations of political interference is where this whole scandal is focused on and centered on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Let me just ask you, though, do you support the use of deferred prosecution agreements? Do you support these kind of instruments being used?
Again, it's up to Parliament to decide what tools to give to public prosecutors and to judges. What I don't support is any interference where when a company or an individual doesn't get the verdict it wants, leaning on elected officials and politicians to pick up the phone and exert pressure to get those decisions reversed. If SNC-Lavalin or anybody else in Canada has an opportunity to make their case, and they do so, and an independent judicial agent, in this case the Director of Public Prosecutions, and then the Attorney General of Canada decide that it's not appropriate, then that's where it has to end.
Does this, in your view, hinge on a cabinet meeting where there's a difference between robust cabinet discussions where the Attorney General may be there, they're discussing SNC-Lavalin, they're discussing the use of a deferred prosecution agreement, and then pressure? What, in your view, is the difference at a cabinet table between pressure and robust discussion?
The Attorney General of Canada is different from other cabinet ministers. Obviously, when a minister of one portfolio or another is about to make a decision, cabinet colleagues can weigh in and talk about different aspects of the file. But the Attorney General, as the chief legal officer in our country, has the responsibility, the duty, and the requirement to operate in a more independent fashion. And that's why the level of independence on this is more important. And that's why actions and conversations and perhaps threats or innuendo take on a greater meaning in this case.
Okay, just last question, and that's key. If the Justice Committee does not invite Jody Wilson-Raybould and key members of the Prime Minister's office to that committee, if they don't do it, how would you characterize that Judicial Committee investigation, that Justice Committee investigation, and what will you do next?
It's a complete sham at that point. If they, again, prevent the people that were actually involved in the scandal from telling what happened or explaining their side of the story, then it's a complete cover-up, and it is just an attempt to distract and to deflect. At that point, we'll be exploring other tools that we may have to get the light shine on this, so that Canadians can have their confidence restored in their justice system.
All right, I got to leave it there. Andrew Scheer, thank you so much. Appreciate you dropping by the program today.